Good afternoon. I'm Jen Barbarat, the Executive Director of the Buell Regional Health Foundation. It's our mission to identify and address the diverse healthcare needs in our community. We provide grant funding to nonprofits that address health and wellness, and we work with local agencies to promote collaboration in addressing the health needs of our community. Thank you for joining us today, and especially thank you to our partners in today's Lunch and Learn, East Stroudsburg University and Primary Health Network. Our first presenter, Nicole, is the Laboratory Director at the East Stroudsburg University, Dr. Jane Huffman Wildlife Genetics Institute, home to the PA Tick Research Laboratory. And our second presenter is our very favorite board member, Dr. George Garrow, and he is now the CEO instead of the CMO of the Primary Health Network. So welcome to both of our presenters, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nicole.
Great. Thank you and happy lunchtime, everyone. I hope that today's presentation, I can provide you with an all-inclusive understanding of what ticks and tick-borne illnesses look like across the Pennsylvania landscape. So we are out of East Stroudsburg University. We are funded through the Pennsylvania Department of Health to establish a tick research lab where we conduct free tick testing services for Pennsylvania residents, which allows us to collect a lot of valuable information about our expanding tick population and the pathogens that they're carrying. So I'm just going to go a little bit through some of the issues that we're seeing in Pennsylvania and the United States. So tick-borne illnesses have been on the rise since the early 2000s. And each year and each that we evaluate this, Pennsylvania has continuously been #1 for leading the nation in reported cases of Lyme disease. And by #1, we have outseeded both of our neighboring states. So New York and New Jersey, if you put together and add up their number of cases, it doesn't even come close to the number of cases that we have in our state. A lot of our research shows that we're ground zero for ticks and tick-borne illnesses, and it does do with a lot of factors that involve how our geographical landscape is and how we have so many number of protected forested areas along with residents living in fragmented populations of forest coverage, which increases our likelihood of being exposed to ticks. Some facts about ticks. Reported cases of Lyme disease are only a portion of the actual number of cases. It does get very difficult to report it based off the CDC guidelines. As physicians and practitioners, you understand that it does have to meet certain criteria for it to be considered a Lyme disease case. And furthermore, the state only collects data specifically from laboratories that are testing. So when laboratories report a positive test result, then the state will count that. So it doesn't include all physicians diagnosing and outside of a negative test. We see percentages of black-legged ticks testing positive in every county of Pennsylvania and high prevalence rates of that as well. So it could be low as 24% and upwards of 64% in some counties, and it does vary seasonally. It can be transmitted in 18 to 24 hours, which is pretty quickly. And it's most common at this time of the year. So once snow melts through the fall, we'll see ticks that can carry Lyme disease. Cases of Lyme disease, we have spikes in cases. So our children are at the highest risk. We see cases from 5 to 15, more specifically in males than females, but we have the highest number of cases in our children. And that a lot of times has to just do with the activities that they are participating in. They may be outside, more likely to roll around in the leaves and less likely to check for a tick unless a parent or loved one has conducted a tick check on them. And then it spikes again to when you see your 50 to 60-year-olds, usually empty nesters, starting to pick up some hobbies, maybe some more outdoor recreational activities, putting them at risk. So there is some age group risk with ticks and tick-borne illnesses. And we see with our data, we collect some survey information that a lot of individuals are exposed in their own backyard. So some people think that ticks fall from trees, or they're only going to get tick bites from deep in the wooded areas. But mainly we see those tick bites occurring in one's backyard when you might be participating in things like yard work, raking leaves, mowing the lawn, or just playing in the backyard with the kids and the dogs. Tend to be the most risky activities for exposure in our state. We see all different types of tick-borne illnesses that are carried by ticks. So it's not just Lyme disease, and those are some things that we need to really consider when evaluating patient symptoms. We see high rates of anaplasmosis increasing in our state. Actually, it's emerging more rapidly than Lyme disease has in the past. So we see upwards of some counties that have 30% of ticks carrying anaplasmosis. And we're doing some publications right now on evaluating co-infection rates. We're finding that Lyme disease is more likely to be co-infected with an anaplasmosis, and the human variant anaplasmosis more specifically. And that's statistically significant and not by chance. So these small mammals that are carrying and transmitting these pathogens to these ticks are transmitting more than just one tick-borne illness. We see babesiosis. It's not a reportable disease in Pennsylvania, but we see up to 6% of ticks will be carriers of the protozoal infection. We have a couple of ticks a year that will find testing positive for Rocky Mountain spotted fever, more specifically the Rickettsia rickettsii, and then as well some ehrlichioses. Both Ehrlichia chafiensis and Ehrlichia ewingi have been identified in our state in tick population specifically. So what are ticks? Ticks are ectoparasites, so they will feed externally on our bodies. So they just burrow their mouth parts into mammals, birds, or reptiles. They're actually part of the spider family. They're mainly found in global temperate environments where we have our 4 seasons, but there are tick species that can be found all over the globe. Black-legged tick in the US and in Pennsylvania is our most medically important tick species. That's going to be the tick that transmits the majority of the pathogens that we find in our state, and is the smallest of the 3 ticks. And we'll go over some pictures of those in a little couple slides. And they have 4 stages. So they start off as eggs. Typically, eggs are laid between May and August. Those eggs will hatch into the larvae, which are very tiny ticks. They only have 6 legs. They tend to feed on small mammals. That's where they are exposed to some of those tick-borne pathogens. Larvae will overwinter and grow into the nymph life stage after a full bud meal. The nymphs are active right at this time of the year, so they start in May, and usually to the end of July is the height of their activity, but some of them will remain active through the fall. Once the nymphs get their blood meal, they'll go through a dormant phase of a few months. It's about 3 to 6 months depending. And then they will emerge as sexually mature adults. Now, the adult female tick is the one that we're going to be most worried for, because they're going to be the ones that attach and feed on human hosts, and humans become an accidental host. The adult males typically, they may attach just to hold on, but they're typically seeking out an adult female so that they can fertilize her so she can proceed and lay her eggs and continue the life cycle. They're capable of transmitting many different types of bacterial, viral, and protozoal infections. And all of these infections are maintained within that wildlife population, and mainly the white-footed mouse and rodent host. Here is our black-legged tick. At this time of the year, we see all life stages pretty much active. The larvae are starting to pop up across our state. These black-legged ticks have been identified in every US state except for Hawaii. You'll see here the adult female is indicated by her dorsal red shield or dorsal back, black legs, black shield. The male has a shield that covers its entire body. The nymph here has black legs and very tiny, about the size of a poppy seed. And then here's some of the pathogens that they transmit: Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, babesiosis, a tick-borne relapsing fever-like bacteria, which is Borrelia miyamotoi. It results in that relapsing fever, a similar infection to Lyme disease, but with that relapsing of the fever. And then you have your Powassan virus or your deer tick virus, or your common ones. Here's some of our data that we've reported, so you can look at the counties at which you're in, but this is total ticks that we tested last year that were black-legged specifically. So this includes our nymphs and our adult populations combined. And the number of pathogens, we looked at Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, babesiosis, and Powassan virus. So here's the prevalence of those tick-borne illnesses. So it could be one or more of those pathogens being detected. And we range from the low 30%, 24% down here in the southern region. But you can see that this northwestern area, or the whole north, pretty much tier up north of the Appalachian, becomes the higher rates of tick-borne infections that we see. And this is based out of a population of 12,500 plus ticks. When you look at the averages across the state, which becomes really important when we refer to averages, because it does vary between county. As you saw in the previous map, there are some counties that are upwards of 70% of those ticks are infected. But averages: Lyme disease 29%, anaplasmosis 7%, babesiosis 1.9%, and essentially almost non-existent. Deer tick virus is 0.08, so just under 0.1%. But you'll see the minimum when you look at minimum and maximum, the span between counties. So Lyme disease, both nymphs and adults combined, upwards of 45.5% carriers, anaplasmosis upwards of 30% in some counties, babesiosis upwards of 10% in counties, and deer tick virus up to 3.5%. So it is county specific. So it's important to understand your area and the tick population in your area so that you have a better understanding of symptoms that might be developing in a patient. This slide here is just to show you and understand that there are differences in life stages, and that's a key point because the feeding, when these ticks feed on the small mammal populations, the more times that they have to encounter a small mammal, the higher the chance is that they'll be carrying a tick-borne illness, since that's where we're going to pick those diseases up in that wildlife ecology life cycle. So our adult populations, when just evaluating our adult ticks, the average is 41%. So you saw on the previous slide, I had about 21%. That's because it was combined adults and nymphs. But when we separate them out, the adults almost have a twofold increase because they have their likelihood of picking up that tick-borne illness occurs at the larval and nymph life stage. Whereas our nymph ticks are only 20% positive for Lyme disease, but they're considered to be our most dangerous because of their size. So their prevalence rate is going to be lower, but the size of that tick is going to be so small. And here you go, it's a poppy seed versus a sesame seed in the adult female. So individuals are less likely to identify a nymph feeding on them until the tick has been attached for relatively about 30 to 40 hours. And Lyme transmission occurs in that 24-hour window, putting them at greater risk of being exposed and that pathogen being transmitted, where the adult females are closer to about a 19-hour period where individuals identify them attaching and feeding. So under that 24-hour window, putting them at a lower risk of that having Lyme disease pathogen and bacteria being transmitted. So it's important to know those life stages and what individuals are being exposed to better understand their risk. The next most common tick that we see in Pennsylvania is the American dog tick. This is the largest of our 3 ticks. Colorations, mainly we just see the adult ticks active at this time of the year, so between May and July. They're the largest of the 3. Brown coloration, and you'll see some white colorations across their dorsal side. They're capable of transmitting ehrlichiosis, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and tularemia, although these are very rare in our state. The next is the Lone Star tick, which is becoming a little bit more common. It has been expanding its geographical range throughout the state. We have all 3 life cycles in Pennsylvania, and all 3 are associated with human pathogens. These are going to be more aggressive than any other tick species that we have in Pennsylvania. So as they expand their geographical range, it's something we need to consider on these pathogens that they could be transmitting. So the adult females have this white dot on her back. The little white dot is the Lone Star reference and how it's gotten its name. The males have very little coloration. The nymphs are about the same size, a little bit larger than the nymph of the black-legged tick, and they have this reddish-brown coloration. It does become challenging to see these 2 tick species, the black-legged tick and the Lone Star tick, at the nymph life stage, unless you have a microscope to be able to evaluate some of their characteristics to separate them out taxonomically. They're capable of transmitting ehrlichiosis, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, tularemia, stari, and they are associated with the affigout allergy, which is a red meat allergy. And it is important to note that the affigout allergy is a result of the saliva of the tick. So all Lone Star ticks carry the affigout-like glycoprotein. It's a sugar protein in their saliva that it resembles, and it creates a mimicry reaction when you eat red meat. So an individual can become allergic to red meats after 1 bite of a Lone Star tick, or could be created after years of exposure. And it's definitely person dependent, but all Lone Star ticks will carry that in their saliva. We do see some other ticks in Pennsylvania, very less likely, and less than 1% of exposures occur, but we have the Ixodes cucii, which is the groundhog tick, which is the main reservoir host for Powassan virus lineage 1, which does cause encephalitis in humans, but it's a very rare exposure to those ticks. And then next is the Gulf Coast tick, which is also increasing its geographical range, and we're starting to evaluate whether or not we have established populations of these ticks in our state. And tick-borne illnesses are your same as what the Lone Star tick really is: ehrlichiosis, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, and tularemia. So here's just a couple things just so you can quickly see how to tell the difference if you're practicing and a patient comes in with a tick. The smallest is the black-legged tick. You're looking for what are called festoons. They look like little like cubes put together on the backside, and you're looking for a red shield, black shield, red body. We have festoons on the dog tick, so you could see these little cube-like structures on its backside, and then white coloration on its shield. The Lone Star tick also has those festoons, and then a reddish brown white dot on the back. So those are some of the distinguishing features to be able to tell between them. It does get a little bit more challenging as the tick feeds, and it's important to note, just because the tick looks large doesn't mean it's not a black-legged tick, because the longer that tick will feed, the shield and legs will remain the same size, but the body will increase in size. And these ticks can get upwards of the size of a grape. And so they do increase relatively large pretty quickly. So they'll feed for about 7 days before they fall off. So once they get like this bean-like grape structure, it does become challenging to still see those features. You see that white dot still there on the Lone Star tick, some of that white coloration on the dog tick, and then the black-legged tick will just have a black shield. So that's important just to note. If it does look larger, it could still be a black-legged tick, and that it was just attached and feeding for a relatively longer time. It's important to note, the faster we can remove a tick, the better it is. The longer the tick is attached, the more likely, if that tick is carrying a tick-borne illness, that it could be transmitted. So Powassan virus is the fastest. It's within 15 minutes because it's carried in the salivary glands of the tick. As soon as that tick attaches to a host, they're releasing the saliva into the host. And with that release of saliva comes pathogens. So any pathogens carried in that salivary gland will be released a little bit quicker. Anaplasmosis or ehrlichiosis, they're also carried closer to the salivary glands, where Lyme disease is carried in the midgut. So it does require it to be attached and feeding for the blood to activate the bacteria to transmit through the salivary glands. So it's a little bit longer in the process. And then tularemia is more of the slower pathogen, around 3 to 5 days. So we want to practice prevention and identifying ticks on us as fast as possible to get those removed. So just some things about ticks. How do we encounter ticks? Well, ticks can't jump or fly, so they don't have wings and they don't have mechanisms in their legs to be able to propel them in that jumping motion. So what they do instead is they're pretty lazy. They sit on the ends of blades of grass and they stick out their forelegs, as you see here in this picture. It's called a questing behavior. Underneath their front forelegs are an organ called the Haller's organ, which is detecting CO2, body odors, and heat. So it's sensing all of these pheromones and the CO2 that's being released from ourselves or mammals, reptiles, or birds. And the more that it's sensing, the faster that these legs will start to move, in hopes that when you brush by, it will grab on. Once it grabs on, it'll start usually from the waist down, and it'll crawl up to an area that is warm, moist, for it to attach. So softer skins, typically armpits, areas that are warm and moist, that have a lot of glands to release sweat, that's where they tend to like to attach. Most ticks, this is called the ambush questing technique, which is what the black-legged tick does. The Lone Star tick's a little bit different. It will go through what's called hunting behavior, where once it starts to detect those pheromones, heat, and CO2, it will actually progressively move towards that source. So it's called hunting because they're very aggressive in that. Instead of just waiting out on grass, they will move towards that host and then crawl up and attach. So where do we find ticks? Pretty much this looks like Pennsylvania right here. We have down trees, anywhere where we're going to find populations of mice. So mice like to live under wood piles, under down trees, up against rock walls, edges of forest, underneath leaf litter. And that's where ticks are going to find their hosts. Areas of tall grass, areas that are out of the direct sunlight and dry, hot areas, ticks cannot survive. They like to be in cool, moist, damp areas. So underneath that leaf litter. If it's tall grass, they can escape the hot sun. They tend to be active during the times of the days that are a little bit cooler. So in the morning time frame, once the dew melts until about 1, 2 o'clock, when it becomes a little too hot for them to be seeking a host. Lyme disease is actually spread. So most people don't know how Lyme disease spread. A lot of people think the deer, white-tailed deer, are going to be what are associated with the spread of Lyme disease and some tick-borne illnesses, but that's actually a myth. Mite-footed mice are actually going to be the reservoir host. So you'll see here all these small juvenile and larvae life stages feeding on that mouse. The mouse is going to be the reservoir host that's transmitting bacterial, virus, and protozoal infections to our tick populations. The white-tailed deer play a role in amplifying the number of ticks that we see in the population, as well as distributing these ticks across the landscape too. They're like little taxi drivers, bringing them in and out of different locations. So some tick prevention, and it's important to practice all of these. So personal, home, yard, and if you have pets, some pet prevention tips. So for personal prevention, you want to consider to wear light color clothing because that would allow you to see those ticks crawling on you a little bit easier. Wearing a hat to keep ticks from trying to crawl up into your hair, wearing long sleeves, tucking your shirt into your pants, packing a tick spray. There are different chemical, natural sprays that you can use for clothing or skin. And then also tucking your pants into your socks. Now, I know this sounds a little nerdy, but it will let you see. So ticks are crawling, remember, they're coming from the waist down. So as they crawl up, if your pants are tucked into your socks, then it will continue to crawl up your light color clothing. Whereas if your pants are just, they could crawl right up under your pants if it's not tucked in, and then we no longer can see that tick crawling, and we might not know where the tick ends up at that point. And depending on the size of the tick, it could be very challenging finding it later in time. Some things that you can do in your yard is to create an environment that is not susceptible to tick survival. So keeping our grass mowed short, shorter grass will be a little drier, and ticks don't like to live in short grass. That will put them in exposure to the sunlight. Keeping our yard free of leaf litter and wood piles, that would reduce the number of small mammals that will come in our area, and that will ultimately reduce your tick population. If you have children and play sets, grandchildren, you might want to increase that sunlight in the play areas and keep the play areas 9 feet from the wooded edges. So ticks may come out of wooded edges, but they won't come further than 6 feet, so it gives you a barrier. Decrease ticks feeding on mice. You can use different tick tubes in your yard that will treat the mice population, and then that will ultimately reduce the ticks that you see. You can spray your yard using different tick repellents, natural or chemical, and you want to do that during the peak tick season, which is spring and fall. So right when snow melts, you should apply usually bi-weekly, at least monthly. And consider putting up a fence to keep out larger mammals that could transport these individuals or these ticks into your yard. Some pet prevention tips. You want to treat the bedding of your dogs or your cats using permethrin, which is a Sawyer's product. Using gloves, let it dry before you or your animal touches it. But that will help to treat any ticks that might be crawling still on your animal after coming inside. Performing regular tick checks, checking underneath their ears, armpits, seeing if any ticks are crawling. I always recommend just to brush your animal every time they come in from outside during the spring and fall time. That will help you just brush those ticks right off. Treat your pet, consider treating them with an anti-tick medication or an anti-tick collar. Remember, our dogs are out there and our cats are out there. They could bring these ticks inside, and if you're snuggling or cuddling with the animal, the tick could crawl off onto you, and you might not be expecting a tick bite if you're not the one going outside. And then you can always speak with a veterinarian about Lyme disease vaccine for dogs. After being outdoors, so anytime in Pennsylvania, if you're outside, whether you're going outside just to pull weed in your garden or water your flowers, you want to come in and make sure you're practicing tick prevention. Again, we are ground zero here in Pennsylvania, so we want to consider educating other residents on being very alert during the tick season. So placing your clothes in the dryer on high heat for 10 minutes. Again, ticks don't like heat, so that will help kill them or any ticks still crawling. Taking a shower as soon as possible within 2 hours, either washing off any ticks that might still be crawling or to identify if one's starting to embed. conducting tick checks, and here are some areas that are frequent ticks that tend to attach, and we do keep track of these areas as we do our testing. We ask residents to report where the tick is attached. So hairline, they'll crawl up to the hairline, around the edges, back of the neck. Armpits are common. Belly button is very common. Midsection, groin area, legs, behind the knees, between the fingers and toes. Make sure you're checking yourselves, pets, and your loved ones, and then you want to remove the tick correctly. So the best way in the CDC recommendation for a tick removal is to use fine point tweezers, grabbing at the base of the mouth part where the tick is attached to the person or the animal, and pulling straight up and out. What we don't want to do is we don't want to use a match, essential oils, alcohol, soap, petroleum jelly. Anything where the tick is going to back out easily on its own actually is creating the tick to be agitated. And once the tick becomes agitated, it could regurgitate contents of its mid-stump and mid-gut into the host, which could increase the transmission of any tick-borne pathogen. So it could put them at a greater risk. So we really just want to grab at the base of the mouth parts and pull straight up and out. And then what can you do with the tick once it's removed? Well, the tick gives us some valuable information. One, we can determine the type of tick it is. So is it a black-legged tick? And how long was that tick attached and feeding for? What is the risk of the patient if the tick were a carrier of a tick-borne illness? And it also gives us important information of if the tick's a carrier, what is it a carrier of, and is it a carrier of more than one tick-borne illness? Because if it's a carrier of babesiosis and Lyme disease, babesiosis cannot be treated with antibiotics. As you know, it's a protozoal infection, needs to be treated differently. So it gives us a better understanding of how to detect, how to comb through symptoms of a patient, better understand what diagnostic testing and treatments need to be completed. So this is a statewide initiative. We do free tick testing through our lab. Ticklab.org is our website. It's very easy to go on. You can submit an order, and the patient can submit an order. You can get the results faxed directly to you if you would like. Once we receive the tick, results are usually complete in 36 hours. So it could be before symptoms even occur in an individual. Not only does it provide you with important information on exposure risk and what the tick may be carrying, but it gives us information on the environment, what's going on in Pennsylvania, what ticks are occurring throughout the state, what are the demographics of these ticks and the individuals being exposed, and what are some of the educational strategies that we can implement to reduce these tick populations. So a couple easy steps: tick can be placed in a clean sealed plastic bag, like a Ziploc bag. Ticklab.org is our website. There's a order form you'll fill out. It's about 2 pages. One is our survey, understanding where the tick was feeding and the person it was attached to. And then one is just the information so we can get results emailed and text message or faxed. You mail it directly to our lab. Our lab does the testing all in-house. The free tick testing covers 5 tick-borne pathogens, and then we do have extensive testing to cover some of the more rare tick-borne illnesses at a small fee for residents. No kits required, and our average turnaround time is 36 hours, and it can be submitted directly to us. So ticklab.org is our website, and we are social. So we do provide tick reports weekly. So every week we'll put out a tick report. Every week we put out different educational strategies and information, so you can follow us and share our content and just stay aware so that we can help prevent the spread of tick-borne illnesses in our state. So thank you, and I'll answer any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm going to ask you if you would, do you mind sticking on through the rest of the presentation? Okay,
absolutely.
Great. So what I'm going to do right now is ask Dr. Garrow to go ahead and unmute, and if he could talk to us a little bit about the Lyme disease vaccine study that's coming about, and then maybe add anything that you'd like to about some of the diseases and the treatments.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Nicole, great job. I was itching, thinking that there were ticks on me, but really great presentation, Nicole. Thank you for that. Very thorough. So there had been a vaccine in the 1990s, early 2000s that was FDA approved to prevent illness related to the bacteria that's associated with Lyme disease. That bacteria is Borrelia. And that particular vaccine was created by GlaxoSmithKline and underwent clinical trials and received FDA approval in 1998. And unfortunately, due to a series of events, the manufacturer actually withdrew the vaccine from the US market. Curiously, the reason that particular vaccine was not a business success for the manufacturer was several-fold. Number one, at that time, Lyme disease was really not as prevalent in all of the states in the US, but was really concentrated in Connecticut and sort of the coastal states in the Northeast. And a lot of bad publicity came out about the particular vaccine. And in fact, it was sometimes nicknamed the yuppie vaccine because people would get the vaccine as they on their way to Cape Cod or to take their yacht out. Unfortunately, it really was not considered to be a vaccine that would benefit folks equitably in other regions of the United States. The CDC and other public health officials also really were not on board and did not really encourage the vaccine at that particular time because, again, it was really considered to be, Lyme disease was considered to be a regional illness, and prevention was probably the most important thing to do, as Nicole had described. And then there was a small series of individuals who filed a class action lawsuit claiming that the company had not been fully transparent regarding potential concerns regarding safety. It turns out that the VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System that we've talked so much about with the COVID vaccine, was in effect back then, and there really was no evidence of widespread side effects or adverse effects related to the Lyme vaccine at that time. But nevertheless, because of all of those factors and the demand for the vaccine just plummeted, the manufacturer withdrew, and we have had no Lyme disease vaccine available to us. Currently, there is a vaccine in development. It's a joint venture between an American vaccine manufacturer. I'm going to say their name and you're going to recognize it. It's Pfizer. And they're working in conjunction with a European vaccine manufacturer called Valvena. And they have just recently completed what we call phase 2 clinical trials, which is a trial really that looks both at efficacy in unique populations, high-risk populations, as well as safety. And recently, the phase 2 studies were completed and showed very favorable results. It showed that the vaccine does produce immunity to the bacteria associated with Lyme disease. So the manufacturer is now looking at beginning what we call phase 3 clinical trials, which is sort of the final stage of vaccine testing before they submit data to the Food and Drug Administration for consideration of approval. The state of Maine recently announced, in fact, it was a week ago today, that the trial is now open or will be opening in July in the state of Maine. For those of you who know me, I'm slightly competitive, and I really wanted Pennsylvania to be the first state that the vaccine would be brought to. But I'm very pleased to report that we have been working with the manufacturer and the folks that are conducting the clinical trial to look at opportunities to bring this very important phase 3 clinical trial to our rural communities. And Nicole showed that map. It showed the prevalence. And they're very, very interested in studying the vaccine in those communities, those counties in Pennsylvania that are ground zero for ticks and for Lyme disease. So we're continuing to work, through the process, and hopefully should have the clinical trial available to residents in our area by the third quarter of this year, hopefully by July or August. The preliminary data, again, looks very positive. It does seem to provide good levels of antibody protection against the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. It's a 3-vaccine series. It appears that the third dose of the Lyme vaccine offers better immune response than just 2 vaccines alone. Tracy, you'll recognize the sound of that. It sounds almost like a booster dose. So, you know, what goes around comes around. Here we are. But we're very, very excited about the opportunity to have a Lyme disease vaccine available to residents of our communities in the state of Pennsylvania. Shifting gears just ever so slightly, I just want to remind everybody that not every tick bite causes Lyme disease. And what I have sometimes said to my very own self, if I have been out raking leaves and I detect a tick on my legs, is don't panic. It doesn't mean I'm going to come down with Lyme disease. Just to do just exactly as Nicole had said, I remove the tick very carefully. I don't want to agitate it so that it doesn't regurgitate its stomach contents. Nicole, I'm going to use that quote a lot. I don't want any tick regurgitating on me. So you want to carefully remove the tick. Even if it's created a bite, it doesn't mean that you're destined to get Lyme disease. It's not unusual after a tick bite that you might get a little bump or redness at the site where the tick has made its bite. That does not equate to Lyme disease. That's not unusual. You just simply remove the tick and keep an eye on it. The hallmark of Lyme disease is a rash that can occur anywhere between 3 days to even a month after a tick bite. And we call it erythema migrans. And it really looks like an expanding bullseye, a rim of redness around a pale center. So if you think you've had a tick bite and you notice sort of this erythema migrans, this bullseye lesion around that area of the tick bite. And certainly if you have any constitutional symptoms, fever, malaise, swollen lymph nodes, other constitutional symptoms, you should seek guidance from your healthcare provider to determine whether or not you really are suffering from early stages of Lyme disease, and they will make a determination whether or not antibiotic treatment is necessary. We currently do not recommend prophylactic antibiotics for someone who's had a simple tick bite. Again, we want to be good stewards of antibiotics, and we don't want to lead to the creation of antibiotic resistance. So we want to be good stewards of our antibiotics. There are lab tests that we can do to determine if a person may have tick disease, a couple of different send-out tests, and your provider may be interested in maybe doing those tests for confirmation. But sometimes if the signs, the symptoms, the history, you've been out, you remember having a tick bite, everything fits into place, they may end up recommending a course of antibiotic treatment even without a laboratory test. So that's what I know about tick-borne illness and Lyme disease and the vaccine. And again, I'm going to channel my favorite founding father, Ben Franklin, who reminded us that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And preventing ticks from they're jumping on you when you go by. They're kind of waiting to attack you as you walk by. Use common sense, and the advice that Nicole had given is very, very, very important. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you to both of our presenters. I'm going to ask Jess now to go ahead and turn off the recording